I am excited to be here and share this presentation with you guys. As Raleigh introduced it, yes, your pain is real, and we'll be discussing why it's real, regardless of what's causing it, as well as when healthcare treatments fail, why that happens, and then find some new hope in some ways that are effective for treating pain. So I'll just tell you a little bit more about myself. I've been married for 16 years now, and we like to go out and do a lot of outdoor activities. My son, he's 14, and he just started high school this fall, so that's kind of exciting. This picture was taken near the Idaho-Montana border last summer doing some mountain biking and things. I also have kind of a small backyard farm. We have 3 ducks, and they're fun to watch waddle around, and we try and grow a little vegetable garden that doesn't always succeed. I've been a physical therapist for 11 years now, and then just recently became certified in Pain Reprocessing Therapy to support and help my pain coaching business grow. So for those of you that were on the Alliance's monthly meeting in April, I shared a little bit more in detail about my story, but I wanted to briefly review some of that for people that weren't on that broadcast, just to kind of introduce a little bit more about my experience leading up to getting into pain coaching and things. In about 2017, I had finally landed my dream job. I specialize in geriatrics and home health, and we had just bought a home in Kennewick, Tri-Cities, Washington area, and life was going good. And then I experienced an injury at work that put me out of work for about 4.5 months. And I went through physical therapy, got some medical treatment, and my back healed up, and I returned to work, and life was good until about a year later when I started to have back pain. And it started off kind of gradual. And at first I thought, oh, maybe I was overdoing it. And so I kind of backed off, and the pain started to get better. But then as I continued to engage in my activities, it slowly got worse and worse until I was really struggling to work. And I thought I probably needed to do something about this pain because it seemed like it was getting worse. So I tried all the stuff I knew to do. I was wearing a back brace. I was doing exercises, stretching, lumbar core stabilization. I even had a TENS unit, was doing electrical stimulation on my back. And then it was still getting worse. And after it came back about 6 months later, I couldn't even work anymore. And by this time I was taking anti-inflammatory medication. I had tried topical rubs on my back. I went back to a physical therapist to have some other professional lay eyes on me and see if I was missing something, if something would work. And ultimately, I decided to get a spinal injection, and it failed miserably. Nothing helped. And I felt like my life was devastated. I was trapped to pain, and it had control of my life. At the time, I believed that I had somehow re-injured my back. And I just knew that if I got in and got an MRI and got with the right doctor, that they would be able to identify the right treatment that would finally solve my pain. And when I got in and got the new MRI, I was shocked and stunned to learn from the doctor that my back was healed. The MRI didn't show any findings, and there was nothing more that the doctors could do for me. Perhaps you have experienced pain that has devastated your life. You've tried all kinds of different treatments, maybe perhaps many of the ones I just shared, and perhaps many other common treatments, but you were still left with debilitating pain and struggling to know what to do about it. I want to share with you that there is hope. There is hope if you haven't had a success with treatments. There's hope Even if the doctors haven't been able to identify something physically wrong with you, there is hope for pain. And I'm going to go in a little bit more detail about my story and how I found this hope. So after I learned that my back was healed, I was bewildered, wondering how I could have such severe pain and have my back healed. If you've had pain for a long time, you've probably heard of mind-body approaches. And if you're anything like I was when I was in the midst of my pain, perhaps you responded like this. When I was going in for physical therapy before I had that MRI and had learned that my back was healed, when I still believed that I had something wrong, I had a therapist who tried to tell me about mind and body approaches. He had special training in pain, and he'd tell me about the science. And I didn't get it. I thought, I have something wrong with my back. Mind and body approaches, they might sound all good, but that's not going to affect my injury and not going to do me a lick of good. So I didn't really pay attention at the time. But once I had learned that my back was healed, I thought, if I have this much pain and my back's healed, maybe there's something to this mind-body stuff and the pain science. And so I went back to him to find out more about it. And what I learned was that pain is a lot more complicated than just a message signal that travels up through your body from an injury and rings a little pain bell in your brain. Pain is much more complicated than that. When there is an acute injury, for example, if you stepped on a nail, sometimes that model of, a signal channel ringing a pain bell, it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of what's going on for acute and immediate injuries. Pain can act as an alarm signal so that you can protect yourself. If you stepped on a nail, you'd want to know about it so you could get it out of your foot. You could seek medical care, make sure it doesn't get infected. And hopefully, within a couple of weeks, couple of months, the tissue heals up and the pain fades and goes away. But long-term pain is a little bit different. Long-term pain comes from generally two different causes. The first cause that we're evolutionarily wired to think of is some kind of physical and structural cause, because when we have an acute injury, we injure some part of our body, we get pain. So it makes sense that we would think it's physical or structural causes. But researchers studying pain and increased rates of pain with the pain epidemic and pain rates rising, they found that, in fact, only about 10% of long-term pain is caused by physical or structural problems. The other cause for long-term pain, which is much more common, results from neuroplastic causes or origins. And the term neuroplastic, neuro for nervous system, and plastic for change. So simply what that means is there's been some kind of change within the nervous system that results in long-term pain in about 90% of people with long-term pain. That's the primary reason they're having pain. And neuroplastic pain is basically when the body or the nervous system and the brain begin to misinterpret safe sensations within the body as if they were dangerous. So for my example, when my back had healed and I was still having pain, I no longer had a physical injury or cause, but the sensations in my body around my back were no longer being interpreted as safe by my brain and my nervous system. And because of these changes, resulting in that pain, even when I had no injury. So to illustrate this in another example. Imagine you have a hearing aid in your ear, and let's just say it's set to a medium volume, say a 4 out of 10. And so you can comfortably hear sounds around you in your environment. You can hear people speaking, you can hear the television, and it's comfortable to wear and listen to. Imagine if that same hearing aid, something happened to it, and all of a sudden the volume got cranked up to 10 and stuck there. It'd be very uncomfortable to listen to. And it's not because the sound or the volume in your environment changed. It's that now the hearing aid is amplifying the sound, making it very loud and uncomfortable. That's similar to what happens in neuroplastic pain. The sensations in your body haven't changed. They're neutral, they're not dangerous, but the brain and the nervous system is amplifying them as if they're dangerous, resulting in that pain. Another good example for neuroplastic pain is the example of an alarm system on a home. When the alarm is set and it's just monitoring the windows or the doors with the sensors, the alarm's not going off, there's no problem. But if somebody were to break the window, we'd want that alarm bell to go off and tell you there's something wrong, there's something dangerous going on. But imagine if that alarm system in the home was miscalibrated, and now it detects just vibrations at the windows, like leaves tapping on the glass or a strong wind, and it starts setting the alarm off when nobody's trying to break into the home. It's not that there's something wrong with the glass or the windows, it's that the alarm is set too sensitive, detecting minor sensations that aren't dangerous, as if that glass was being broken. And so in this case, you'd want to retune the alarm system, turn its sensitivity down so that it would only go off when there's actual damage taking place to the glass or the window. So those are my two examples for neuroplastic pain and what's going on. Now, pain, regardless of the cause, whether it's an acute injury like stepping on a nail, or it is neuroplastic changes in the brain or the nervous system, it is all real pain. It is all experienced in the body. I also like to point out that neuroplastic pain, it mimics real physical pain, and it can mimic pain in any part of the body. It can mimic headaches, or it can be headaches, but it mimics the physical parts of the body as if it's mimicking a physical injury or a physical problem. Researchers have also identified that regardless of whether it's physical or structural pain or neuroplastic pain, the same areas of the brain are involved with that experience of pain. Researchers took individuals and placed them in what's called a functional MRI. So this looks at real-time brain activity. And while they're scanning people's brains, they would poke them with a hot probe to provoke pain, and they'd look at the part of the brain that lit up. And they found a specific pattern when people experience pain, certain parts of their brain light up and have activity. Well, they took these same individuals and under hypnosis, put them back in the brain scanner, and then they just told them under hypnosis that they were being poked with a hot probe when they weren't. And the same parts of the brain lit up with pain, and they reported experiencing real pain. And this also goes for people, whether they have acute pain or neuroplastic pain, the same areas of the brain are involved with that same pain experience, regardless of where it's at or where the pain's originating from. So this whole idea was a real turning point for me, and finding hope and being willing to try mind-body approaches. Because before, I knew and just thought my back was re-injured and that was causing my pain. And by learning this information, it gave me hope to look and embrace mind-body approaches. And the whole goal of mind and body approaches is to help the body and the nervous system, the brain, begin to reinterpret those sensations as safe or neutral within the body to reduce or turn down the pain. And so that idea of the hearing aid that got cranked up to a volume 10 and stuck there, to reduce that amplification, you need to turn down the volume of the hearing aid. And that's the same idea with mind-body approaches. The goal is to turn down that amplification of these safe sensations in the body so they're no longer experienced as dangerous, producing that long-term pain. Researchers also took a look at what happens to people's brains when they do engage in mind-body practices to reduce the neuroplastic changes. And here on the left, we have a picture of somebody's brain in one of those functional MRI scanners. And it shows a lot of activity in the pain areas that are involved with the experience of pain. And when neuroplastic pain is present, those areas of the brain are active all the time. There's not a lot of downtime with those areas of the brain. They interfere with sleep, they interfere with the endocrine system, the immune system, all kinds of normal body functions. They interfere with digestion, because all these areas of the brain are involved in kind of a pain meeting all the time, so they get hijacked from their regular function. So after they engage in mind-body practices and they report experiencing reduced pain, they've rescanned their brains and they find that these pain areas have quieted down. They're no longer hijacked in a pain meeting all the time. They're now engaged in their normal brain functions. And when they're experience, an acute injury, like they're prodded with a hot probe, they'll light up, but they'll turn back off and go back to that normal resting function, waiting to warn of danger rather than just being on constantly. So what are these mind and body approaches? And I'm sure if you've been in pain a long time, you've heard of a lot of these and perhaps have tried some of them. Common ones are yoga and Tai Chi, meditation, mindfulness, somatic tracking, guided imagery. I'm going to upload a document with just a list of common mind and body approaches. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail how to do those because the resources available for those approaches are vast. There's tons of books, websites, videos, YouTube videos. If you're interested in one of the mind-body approaches, there's tons of resources. So I'll just give you a list, and then if one sounds interesting to you, you can look and find those resources. But I do want to mention a couple in particular, and that is the Curable app and Pain Reprocessing Therapy. They're programs that have taken a lot of the mind-body approaches and put it all together in a package with a lot of pain science education. And those, when they're packaged together, they tend to be very effective for reducing long-term pain caused by neuroplastic changes. So the next question people have is they want to know, how do they determine if their long-term pain is resulting from neuroplastic causes or changes in the brain and the nervous system? So I put together, I'll go through the next section of the presentation. There's some very specific patterns that we see in people who have neuroplastic pain that are very different than structural or physical caused pain. So one of the first of those is pain that originated or started during a time of stress, or pain that's worsened by stress. And this stress could be even happy occasions like getting ready for a wedding or other things. But physical problems don't result from stress, and physical pain or structurally caused pain usually doesn't change with stress or go away when there's low stress. So pain that starts with stress, originated during a time of stress, or seems to change when there's more stress, that's a sign that your pain could be neuroplastic. And the next item is pain that started without an actual injury taking place. And this is really interesting. They did a study where they simulated a car crash. The researchers, they had the car set up with some ropes and pulleys, they had some flashing lights, they had some noise and spread broken glass, and they jostled the car and made it appear as if the person in the car was in a car wreck, but there wasn't any physical trauma. And they found that 3 months after the simulation, between 10 and 20% of the people still had reported neck pain even without an injury. And so if your pain started without any kind of a physical injury, it's likely neuroplastic because it takes trauma or force to cause structural physical damage. The other item is if your pain has lasted 3 months, 6 months, a year after an injury, that's also an indication that it may be neuroplastic, because the body has a phenomenal capacity to heal. Just like my back, it healed up after that original injury, but my pain was still coming because of neuroplastic changes long after the injury. Another sign that it may be neuroplastic is to develop pain in multiple parts of the body. Structural causes tend to be isolated to one part of the body where some kind of trauma or injury took place, but to have pain develop in multiple areas of the body is more likely to be neuroplastic. Or if your pain develops symmetrically, such as having it in both wrists at the same time or both ankles, when it's on both sides of the same part of the body, it's more likely to be neuroplastic. Another way to detect if it's neuroplastic is if your pain moves around, spreads. This could be such as, when your pain first started, it was just kind of in your back, and then over time it spread up and now it's in your legs or your neck. And other people find that their pain bounces around day to day. One day it's really bad headache, and the next day they have knee pain, and the next day it's back pain. So any kind of spreading pattern indicates that it's likely neuroplastic pain. If your pain seems to be triggered by things that have nothing to do with your body, such as the weather or the time of day or the time of week, or perhaps it's triggered by things that you can't even detect a pattern when it may come on and leave, those are signs that it could be neuroplastic. A trauma, childhood experiences where you just didn't feel safe or have a stable home environment, that can be associated with risk for developing neuroplastic pain as an adult. And then there's some personality traits and characteristics that tend to be associated with neuroplastic pain, such as worrying or being self-critical, having high anxiety, or very detailed oriented and perfectionistic. Any of those traits can increase risk for neuroplastic pain. The next one is if you've had all kinds of healthcare treatments and they failed to treat your pain, that's a clear sign that it's likely neuroplastic. The healthcare treatments that are available today, they're very effective for structural and physical causes of pain. They're highly effective for injuries and things. But when they are not successful for treating pain, it's not that these treatments aren't effective for structural problems, but they're focused on the wrong target. Only 10% of long-term pain is attributed to structural physical problems. 90% of people with long-term pain, it's coming from neuroplastic changes. So these treatments, they're hitting the wrong target and they're failing to treat people's pain. And then the last item I like to point out is when you've had all kinds of medical tests and workup with the doctor, and the doctors come back and they say, we can't find anything wrong with you. And that can be a strong indicator that your pain's likely neuroplastic, or you've received tons of different explanations for your pain. You see a different provider and they say, no, your pain's coming from this. Or you see another provider, no, it's this. And you have tons of diagnoses. Those two things, having lack of a diagnosis or multiple diagnoses, those both indicate that your pain may be neuroplastic. So what I've put together is a neuroplastic pain questionnaire online. And after my presentation, I can put a link in the chat box. And if you'd like to go through that questionnaire, I respond with a personalized response to your answers that can help you determine if perhaps your pain is neuroplastic. So in summary, yes, your pain is real. If you've had it a long time or a short time or from an injury or no matter where it's coming from, pain is real pain. The reason that healthcare treatments for your pain have failed is because they've been focused at the wrong target. They've been focused on those physical structural problems, but most long-term pain is neuroplastic. That is a change that's taken place in the nervous system. But there's hope. Neuroplastic pain is reversible. Mind-body approaches are very effective at helping to retrain the brain, calm down the nervous system, and help reduce pain.